Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving back into some entitled people stories. 3 brand new stories, and instead of just telling them one by one, we're going to compare them. 3 different situations, 3 different kinds of entitlement, and 3 people who all made the same mistake in very different ways. A neighbor who thought a private garden was public property, an attorney who thought intimidation could override safety laws, and a patient who treated a medical emergency like a scheduling inconvenience. Stick around to the end, because when we put these stories side by side, a really clear pattern shows up, and once you see it, it explains exactly why all 3 ended the way they did. My garden isn't a public orchard, even if I grow more than I need. I, female 45, have a front yard with a lot of flowers and fruit trees. Over the years, I've turned it into a mix of flower beds and fruit trees, apples, plums, figs, berries, and a rotating cast of whatever I'm experimenting with that season. It didn't happen overnight. It took planning, trial, and error, plenty of failures, and more hours than I can count spent pruning, watering, protecting young trees, and nursing plants back from pests or storms. My neighborhood gets a lot of foot traffic. People walk dogs, push strollers, or just wander through because it's a pretty area. A lot of them stop to admire the garden, and I don't mind that at all. I've had lovely conversations with neighbors and strangers alike about what's growing, what's ripe, and how long certain trees take to produce. When harvests are big, I'll often put a small bucket near the fence with a sign inviting people to take a few pieces. I also can fruit, make preserves, and donate a good portion to my kids' school and a local food bank. Sharing has always been part of why I grow so much. That said, I've learned the hard way that sharing needs boundaries. Years ago, I made the mistake of saying yes when someone asked if they could pick fruit themselves. I came home to stripped branches, broken limbs, and fruit smashed into the ground. After that, I stopped letting people pick on my own. If someone asks, I'll happily pick fruit for them and hand it over. That way I can protect the trees and make sure nothing is wasted. Your kindness can't protect the plants from carelessness. That one bad experience is why you have the I'll pick it for you rule now. It's not you being controlling, it's you learning from a mess. There's a family in my neighborhood who walk by often, a couple and their young daughter. They've commented on my trees for years, usually along the lines of how beautiful they are or how lucky I am to have so much. More than once, the parents have joked that I must have more fruit than I could ever use. I've always smiled politely and changed the subject, because while I do grow a lot, it's grown with intention. About 1.5 years ago, they asked if their daughter could pick fruit because she loves the experience. I hesitated, but I didn't want to be the grumpy neighbor who says no to a kid. I agreed, thinking it would be a one-time thing. I stayed nearby, but it was chaos. Fruit was pulled off before it was ripe, branches were bent and snapped, and by the time they left, there were squashed pieces all over the ground. I cleaned it up and told myself it wasn't worth making a fuss. Then a different tree ripened later that season, and I came outside to find them picking again, without asking. I assumed it was a misunderstanding and let it go, but after that, it kept happening. Whether I was home or not, they would let their daughter wander into my yard and pick fruit or flowers. I'd see them on walks doing the same thing to other people's yards, letting her grab blossoms as if everything along the sidewalk was fair game. The little girl herself is sweet. This isn't about her. It's about the adults who never once stopped to teach her that you have to ask before you take something that doesn't belong to you. The final straw came recently when I caught them in the act again. I stepped outside and said calmly, "Hey, please don't pick without asking." The mother looked genuinely offended. "Oh, I thought you already gave us permission." "I gave permission once," I replied, "for one tree, one time. Not for everything I grow." The father crossed his arms and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself. It's just fruit. She's a little girl trying to learn what it's like to pick." I was stunned by the entitlement in his tone. "If that experience is important to you," I said, "why haven't you planted anything for her yourselves?" The mother scoffed. "That's not the point. This is about being neighborly. You have plenty. It's free food." "Yes, it's free because I grow it," I said. "That doesn't make it communal property." She went on about how I was being greedy, how I clearly didn't need all of it, how it was selfish to deny a child something so simple. I told them very plainly that my garden is not a public orchard. I grow food for my family for donation and sometimes to share, but always by my choice. I reminded them that they had already caused damage and waste once, and that I wasn't comfortable with them treating my yard like an extension of theirs. They made it seem like you were the bad guy for saying no, instead of them being the problem for taking things without care and without asking. It's a classic move, acting like wanting your own stuff to yourself is a character flaw, so they don't have to feel bad about their own behavior. The conversation ended with them walking away angry, muttering about how unbelievable it was that someone could be so stingy. Since then, I've heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they've been telling people I'm greedy and unfriendly. Here's the thing they don't seem to understand. Sharing doesn't mean surrendering control. I don't know access to my labor simply because it produces something desirable. I taught my own children about planting by planting with them, not by letting them raid someone else's yard. If I wanted my garden to be a free-for-all, I'd run it that way. I don't. So now I've put up a small fence along the most vulnerable sections, and I no longer leave buckets out. It's unfortunate because one family's entitlement ruined a system that worked just fine for years. But my trees are healthier, my flowers are intact, and my yard is once again treated like what it is, a home, not a convenience. They still walk by, they don't comment anymore, and honestly, that quiet's been worth more than any fruit I've ever grown. Putting up the fence and taking the bucket away fixed everything, but it's sad you had to do it. Their attitude ruined a good thing for everyone. Now the silence when they walk by is the best part. It means the problem's finally over, and your garden is yours again. And our second story. Entitled patient demands to be seen during a medical emergency. This happened a few years ago, but it still aggravates me every time I think about it. At the time, I was working as a receptionist at a fairly busy medical clinic. Most days were chaotic, but this particular day was the calm before a major holiday. The schedule was lighter than usual, the staff were in good spirits, and things were moving smoothly for once. It felt like one of those rare days where nothing was going to go wrong. Earlier that morning, we had a patient and his wife who completely no-showed their appointment. No phone call, no warning, no attempt to reschedule. After the standard grace period passed, their appointment was officially canceled and the slot was closed out. That's normal procedure, especially on a packed schedule. Once an appointment is gone, it's gone. Later that morning, a patient came in for a follow-up visit after recently being discharged from the hospital. The second I saw them walk through the door, alarm bells went off in my head. They looked pale, unsteady, and visibly unwell, like someone who should not have been walking around at all. I checked them in and quietly alerted the back office to keep an eye on them. Less than 10 minutes into their appointment, everything exploded into chaos. The patient suddenly lost consciousness and went into cardiac arrest right there in the exam room. The doctor and medical assistant immediately started CPR, and someone yelled for the crash cart. I grabbed the phone and called emergency services, trying to stay calm while giving the dispatcher critical information as fast as I could. The waiting room turned into a nightmare. The patient's spouse was crying and screaming, completely distraught. Staff were shouting instructions to one another while trying to keep the situation contained. Other patients were walking in and stopping dead in their tracks, realizing something serious was happening right in front of them. Despite the chaos, most people behaved like actual human beings. Patients quietly signed in, whispered questions, or simply sat down and waited without complaint. Some even offered words of encouragement or asked if there was anything they could do to help. It was one of those moments where you're reminded that empathy still exists. And then the entitled couple walked in. As I was finishing up my emergency call, I noticed aggressive tapping on the glass at the front desk. Not a polite knock, but repeated impatient pounding. I turned around and saw the same couple who had missed their appointment earlier that morning. They looked annoyed, arms crossed, clearly inconvenienced by the scene unfolding around them. The man leaned forward and said, "Hey, we're here for our appointment. I hope the wait isn't going to be long." Then he added with a scowl, "Also, it's really rude that you were on the phone when we walked in." I honestly had to pause for a moment to process what he had just said. "I'm sorry," I replied, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "As you can see, we're dealing with a medical emergency. Also, your appointment was over 2 hours ago and was already canceled." I gestured vaguely toward the back where CPR was still actively happening. The wife rolled her eyes and said, "Yeah, we know we're late, but can't you just fit us in now? We're already here." Before I could answer, the man gestured toward the exam room and said something that still makes my skin crawl. "Why can't we just take that person's appointment? They're not going to be using it." For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. I asked him to repeat himself, hoping I was wrong. He didn't hesitate. "They're dying on the floor," he said flatly. "They don't need the appointment anymore." His reasoning was chilling. In his mind, a dying person was already a ghost, and their appointment slot was just a free space to grab. He wasn't seeing a human tragedy. He was seeing a scheduling opportunity. It's a special kind of selfishness that treats other people's crisis as a simple inconvenience to work around. Something inside me snapped. Then my patience evaporated completely. "No," I said firmly, "that's not how this works. Your appointment is canceled and you'll need to reschedule for another day. We are actively dealing with a life or death emergency." The man threw his hands up and raised his voice. "This is such bullcrap. You could have squeezed us in this whole time. It would have taken 5 minutes. The doctor could have seen us while the paramedics handled the other person." Behind me, the doctor was counting compressions out loud and the patient's spouse was sobbing uncontrollably. "You just wasted our time," he continued. "We're never coming back here again." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Okay." That was the end of the conversation. They stormed out while the rest of the waiting room stared at them in stunned silence. Minutes later, paramedics arrived and took over care. The patient was stabilized and rushed to the hospital. The clinic slowly returned to something resembling normal, though everyone was emotionally shaken and exhausted. We finished the day on autopilot. The patient survived and made a full recovery. Months later, they returned to personally thank the staff who saved their life. As for the entitled couple, they never came back to our clinic. And honestly, that was the best possible outcome. Their permanent absence was the gift they gave the clinic by walking out. The fact the patient survived and came back to say thanks is the happy ending. That couple walking out for good is the other happy ending. And our last story. My attorney neighbor tried to stop my safety fence. We bought our downhill house in a quiet California neighborhood for one reason and one reason only: the backyard. It wasn't huge, but it had an old in-ground pool that clearly hadn't been loved in years. The tile was cracked, the deck was faded, and the filter sounded like it was held together by hope and zip ties. Still, we saw potential. Over the course of a year, my wife Sarah and I poured time, money, and weekends into restoring it. By the end, it wasn't flashy, but it was safe, clean, and exactly what we wanted. That sense of satisfaction lasted right up until our insurance company did their routine inspection. The inspector walked the perimeter, clipboard in hand, nodding approvingly at most things. Then he stopped at the fence we shared with our uphill neighbor, Tom. He measured it twice, frowned, and tapped the top rail with his pen. "This fence is 48 inches, he said. "California Pool Safety Code requires a 60-inch barrier." I felt my stomach drop. "But that's the shared fence," I said. "We didn't build it." He shrugged sympathetically. "Doesn't matter. You have a pool. You're responsible for compliance. You've got 30 days to fix it or your policy gets dropped." 30 days. We had a pool party planned for my nephew's birthday. More importantly, we couldn't risk losing insurance on a house with a pool. That wasn't optional. Tom had always been difficult, a real estate attorney, mid-50s, immaculate yard, perfectly trimmed hedges, and an air of someone who believed rules existed mostly for other people. We'd exchanged polite hellos over the years, nothing more. Still, this fence was shared, so I went over it with printed plans and a calm approach. "Tom," I said, laying the papers out on his patio table, "we've got a compliance issue. The fence height isn't legal for a pool. We need to build a taller fence just inside our property line. We'll cover all costs. It won't touch your yard." He scanned the plans, then looked past me at his pristine hedges. "No," he said flatly. "No. That will obstruct my view and reduce my property value. My fence is fine. I don't care what your insurance company says." "It's state law," I replied. "We don't have a choice." That's when he smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind that lawyers say for depositions. "Build it," he said, "and I'll sue you for nuisance and intentional diminution of property value. I'll get an injunction to stop construction. I'll structure it so you pay my attorney's fees as well as your own. It'll drag on for years." He bet that the fear of legal costs would trump the fear of legal liability. He forgot that his opponents had a far more powerful ally on their side, the insurance industry, for whom liability is a calculable risk, and frivolous lawsuits are a cost of doing business. I left his yard feeling sick. The threat wasn't loud or emotional, it was calculated. Sarah, however, was unimpressed. "We're not breaking the law because he's throwing a tantrum," she said. "We're pulling permits." The permit process was smoother than I expected. The planning department reviewed everything, and because our city has a view preservation ordinance, they even sent an official out to assess potential impact. That official stood in Tom's living room, looked through his window at the 10-foot laurel hedges lining the property, laughed and said, "What view? You can't see their yard at all through your own landscaping." Permit approved. We hired a licensed contractor and scheduled the work. The day the fence post went in, Tom lost his mind. He stood on his deck with his phone held high, narrating like a war correspondent. "I'm documenting the obstruction," he shouted. When we ignored him, he escalated. He grabbed hedge trimmers and cut a 20-foot section of his laurels down to bare stumps, creating a sudden ugly window straight into our yard. "There," he yelled to his wife, "now I have a view." A week later, we received a letter from his law firm. It was dense with legal threats, nuisance, emotional distress, attorney's fees, demands to cease construction immediately. It was designed to intimidate. It worked on me. Sarah, on the other hand, drove straight to the office of a local land use attorney, Linda. Linda read the letter once, then laughed. "He's threatening to sue you for building a permitted code-required safety structure on your own property because he cut down his own hedges? This is delightful." She didn't just write a response, she filed a preemptive lawsuit against Tom for trespass, abuse of process, and intentional interference with economic advantage. Her cover letter warned him that threatening frivolous litigation to coerce someone into violating state safety law was itself actionable, and that his conduct would be reported to the California State Bar if he proceeded. Linda's move was a masterclass in legal jiu-jitsu. Tom was no longer the aggrieved plaintiff, he was a defendant facing serious allegations. The threat of a state bar complaint transformed the battlefield from one of property lines to one of professional licensure, a far more existential threat to a lawyer. His law practice was suddenly turned against his own career. Things unraveled fast after that. During the final fence inspection, a city inspector noticed Tom's butchered hedges and the direct line of sight into a pool that was still technically under construction. His property was red-tagged. A notice appeared on his door ordering him to reestablish a visual barrier within 48 hours or face daily fines of $500. Meanwhile, our insurance company assigned counsel to defend us. Because Tom's claims were baseless, our policy covered the defense and opened the door for cost recovery. 3 weeks later, Tom showed up at our door looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He wasn't holding a lawsuit, he was holding a settlement agreement. He agreed to drop all claims, pay a portion of our legal fees, plant a code-compliant visual barrier at his expense, and sign a notarized letter stating he had no objection to our fence. In return, we agreed not to pursue the bar complaint. The fence went up, solid, safe, legal. 6 months later, Tom sold his house. The listing proudly advertised a beautiful, private, fully fenced yard. The new neighbors brought us wine on move-in day. The previous owner seemed intense, they said. He kept muttering about never tangling with a damn Linda and an insurance company over a pool. We smiled, clinked glasses, and finally enjoyed our backyard in peace. In the first story, you have enough turned into permission to take. In the second, my time matters outweighed someone else's life. In the third, I'm a lawyer became a threat instead of a solution. Different people, different power plays, same blind spot. None of them paused long enough to realize where their authority actually ended. So guys, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a new video every single day. Thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.